guys, and welcome to Sasquatch Odyssey. So glad you could be with us for tonight's show. I want to start out by saying, first and foremost, thank you guys from the bottom of my heart for all the downloads and all the support after episode 1. It meant the world to me, and I'm so glad that you guys are back tonight for round 2. We got a great show planned for you tonight. We got Jake coming up here shortly. But before we get into the show, as always, I just want to encourage you, if you've had an encounter and you'd like to be on the show, shoot me an email. You can get me at brian@sasquatchodyssey.net. I answer emails daily. You can hit me up on Facebook. I'm pretty active there. You can private message me there on Facebook, and I will get back to you as soon as possible. So, like I said, I just really, really appreciate from the bottom of my heart all the support that you guys have shown the show so far. So, we got a great show planned for you. Let's get into it tonight.
Thank you guys for being with us tonight. I'm going to welcome Jake to the show now. Jake is a law enforcement officer and had an encounter with Sasquatch that was pretty interesting. So welcome to the show, Jake.
Hey, Brian. Thanks for having me on, taking the time to bring me on. It's nice to talk to you. I know we sent a couple messages back and forth. I'm real interested to come on tonight and see what you guys are all about.
Absolutely, man. I appreciate you very much for being on the show. So you had an encounter. When was your encounter?
My encounter was back in 2010, so it's been 11 years now.
Okay. This
all happened. I'm from Michigan. I've lived like Metro Detroit area, so very, very suburb area. But we've been traveling north since I was a kid. I've got my 2 sets of my grandparents live in the northern lower peninsula. So where my encounter happened, for those who are not familiar, it's about 300 miles north of Detroit, so about 4.5 hours north driving. And basically what happened, right now I'm only 25, so I was a kid at the time. And I've been outdoors my whole life, and I'm an avid outdoorsman. I'm used to be a hunter. I'm not so much anymore, but I have a lot of experience in the woods. And we were just up north, kind of like always. We would always go up there for the summer, and I'd spend a lot of time up there, weeks at a time, come home for a couple of days and shoot right back up there during summer break. So I was up there visiting my grandparents, and the little community they live in is 360 degrees surrounded by state land outside of their little, I guess you would call it, subdivision. It's mostly manufactured homes, double-wide trailers put on slabs, of course. And so around them is just all state land on this little city. Where they live is really no grocery store or anything. I mean, it's pretty remote. They're about 20 minutes from the nearest town. So, but just walking around up there, I like to kill time by walking through the woods. And I remember that day I was walking down to the boat launch. It was probably, it was getting close to dusk in the summertime, so it was probably 7:30, 8 o'clock. And the boat launch from their house is a good, probably mile walk, 20, 25 minutes to get there. I hung out there for a little bit, and I was walking back, and it was, really starting to get dark at that point. And I was a good probably only about 100 yards from the house. And I heard this rustling off to my left. And where they're at is all dirt roads. I mean, there's no paved roads. Like I said, it's a pretty remote, pretty rural area. And they're surrounded by state land, which is all in that area, very thick forest. So I heard some rustling, and, at first I didn't really think much of it. I assumed it was a deer, or it could have been a small animal or whatever. So it starts getting louder, and it sounded like it was getting closer. So naturally I stopped and I looked, and I'm looking off into the woods, and yeah, I'm not seeing anything, but I'm hearing this movement of some sort. I'm hearing, the bushes, and I'm hearing what sounds like scraping up next to trees, things of that nature. Instantly, I assumed it was maybe a deer rubbing its antlers or something, although, they usually do that in the fall near the rut. Being that this was in July, a little strange at first. So I just stood there for a couple minutes staring off into the woods trying to find something. I didn't find anything, so I continued walking. But this goes on for another probably 2-3 minutes, and I stop again because it sounds like it's picking up. That's when I saw if I had to guess, 40 yards, 30 yards, 40 yards, I could see this silhouette of something very dark at the time. I mean, it was getting dark outside, so I couldn't tell if it was brown or if it was black. I saw this very dark figure close to the ground. There is a very good population of black bear in that area. They're pretty heavy populated up in northern Michigan. So, of course, I assumed, okay, that's a black bear. Not good for me to be out here. One, I'm by myself. Two, I don't have any type of protection. And regardless of how big of a bear it is, I don't want to be face-to-face with a black bear with no protection anyway. So I start walking, but I'm still looking at it. And it stops, and I don't hear the movement anymore. So I still keep on walking. I can still see it as I get farther. Well, then it stands up. And when it stood up, it made me freeze because I've seen plenty of bear up there before. But it stood up, and I could see the outline of this thing. And its arms were not bear arms. Its arms went down to its side. And normally when a black bear stands up, or any bear for that matter, the arms go out in front because the legs are not very long on bears. Of course, they're bent. They go out in front. This was down to its sides, below its, what I would assume was the waist. And if I had to guess, it was probably the same height as me, which at that point in my life, I mean, I hit 6'1" by the time I was 12 years old. So I was over 6 foot. I had the best guess from that judgment. It looked like it was about the same size as me as far as height-wise, which wouldn't put it out of the realm of a black bear. You know, I mean, even a trophy bear, black bear is still 7 feet, if not just under that. So I'm kind of in amazement at what I'm looking at, and I don't see any type of a face or anything like that, but I notice the arms, and I notice there's no ears. I can't see any ears on top of the head, and even though it's dark, I could see the outline of the head. I could see the outline of what I have to assume were shoulders. And like I said, I could see those arms that go straight down and droop. And the reason I knew right away that they were arms is that the left one started to move. And not like he picked it up and started to move, but it just slowly moved back and forth, kind of like when you swing your own arm when you're walking, although it was standing still. Before this, I always heard of Bigfoot, Sasquatch. I've been interested in it my whole life, but I've also been interested in, the paranormal growing up. And I was just into those oddball things as a kid. When I was in that environment, I never thought of Bigfoot. It was actually about a year later when I was telling my grandfather this story that he brought up that, he thought he's had encounters in that area as far as vocal encounters, not physical sighting encounter. But so I'm still looking at this thing, trying to kind of determine what the hell I'm even looking at. And that's when it started to walk on 2 feet. And I've seen videos of bear walk. I've never physically seen one, but the arms swung when it walked like humans would. The arms were not out in front of it. It was still by its side. It took a couple steps. I mean, maybe 5 steps. And then it dropped back down to the ground, and I could see where the back would have been. And it just ran off in the other direction on all hind legs. At that point, that's when I turned around and started running. And I've never, even to today, I've never come across something in the woods that I have ran from since that day. It was a very, I guess, shocking experience because I didn't feel necessarily afraid the whole time until whatever it was dropped down and ran away. When it started moving on all fours, at that point, in my head, I was like, that had to have been some kind of weird bear. And like I said, I told my grandfather that story. He's actually, outside of now you, Brian, and whoever listens to the podcast, nobody else has heard that story before. I have not shared it. But yeah, it was a very, very strange experience. And that, so far, up to this point, is the only visual sighting that I believe I've ever had. Yeah, I don't know.
Well, I really appreciate you coming on and sharing that with us.
It's no problem.
When you saw this thing, you're 40 yards away, which is pretty close.
Yeah.
Relatively close. What were you thinking at the time when you saw this? Were you thinking that's a bear? Were you thinking that's possibly a Sasquatch? What was going through your mind when you're looking at this thing from 40 yards away?
Well, yeah, in my head initially, when it stood up, well, even before it stood up, when I caught the silhouette of it on the ground, I was like, well, crap, that's a bear. It stood up, and I was like, okay, it's definitely a bear. But that's when I started noticing the arms, and I was like, well, bears' arms don't, first of all, they're not that long, and they don't usually go by their sides. I've never seen a video of a bear walking with its arms next to its sides, personally. I mean, if they're out there, I would love to be able to find one. I've only seen them where they're kind of bent out in front of them. And even if they were, I can't imagine they would be as long as these arms were. I mean, they were down to at least midway down the body. So it looked so much like a human that, you know, I hypothetically, I was like, well, maybe I did see a Bigfoot after I got back to the house. But I also have always tried to be the guy that's like, you know, it could be real, but what else could it have been? Like, I try to be as skeptical as possible, although after so many years and after having some vocal encounters, I know some people like to call them Class B encounters, there's no doubt in my mind that there's something out there that most people are not willing to recognize. The lucky few that have seen whatever it is, obviously they know what's out there. And at this point in my life, I truly believe there's something out there and that I did see one when I was younger. I would love to see it again. But yeah, initially in my mind, I really thought it was a bear until I saw those arms. That's when I was almost just frozen of, I don't know what this thing I'm looking at is. It could be a bear. It could be a Bigfoot. I was shocked and almost confused. I was so confused I just was staring at it, trying to justify whatever it was I was looking at.
I think that's the natural. I've heard that from many, many people. That's the natural reaction, because you see something like that and you want to put it in a box that you can check off. I was in law enforcement for 16 years, so I kind of do that on a daily basis. I'm no longer in that. I've moved on to other things, but that's the natural reaction that most people have, is you want to check that box and say, okay, that's this is a threat, that's not a threat. And I've ran across black bears in the woods on my property here in North Carolina, and I've had that moment of, oh, wow, that's a bear. I've never had a visual encounter with a Sasquatch, so I can only imagine what that would be like. Could you, I know it was 40 yards away, but you said it was around 6 feet, maybe a little bit taller. How wide was this thing? Was it a normal size for 6 feet? Was it heavy? Was it broad shoulders? Could you estimate the width of this thing?
Yeah, at the time, like I said, my biggest wonderment were the length of its arms and how far down they went. But the shoulders, yes, they were very broad. And they looked like shoulders. I mean, they looked like what a human looks like. It wasn't as defined as far as the neck, because when you're looking at a human, and I have to assume it was looking away from me. I only assume that because I could not see any type of facial features. I couldn't see a nose. I couldn't see a snout if it potentially was a bear. I just saw the black outline silhouette of this thing. But it wasn't as defined as a neck. It almost looked like it went from the head to very big trapezoids, almost traps up there near your, just the neck looked so muscular, and then it went right into these very broad shoulders. If I had to put a rough guess on the width, maybe 3 feet where the shoulders were across. I mean, it was very
pretty wide.
It was very wide. Yeah, very wide.
When this thing dropped down to all fours, did it scamper off? Did it just lumber off? Was it look like it was in a hurry to get out of the area, or was it just kind of doing its own thing? And
yeah, when it did drop down and it finally moved, it was the quickness of it, I think, is what probably finally put that fear in my head of, because it definitely was going away from me. I could tell that it wasn't coming near me, but at the same time, as soon as it dropped down and started going away, it moved so fast, and I could hear it move away. Like, I could hear the the bushes moving. I could hear it trampling through stuff. I couldn't physically see it, I couldn't see the arms or anything for how far I was, although the silhouette on its back, and again, like I said, I was 40 yards away. It was starting to get dark at that point, but it didn't look like it bounced around too much. It looked like it stayed pretty level to, I guess, the horizon, you would say. It wasn't clear behind it. Whatever this thing was, he, she, it, was in the middle of the forest still. But you could tell that the back was pretty flat for the most part. It didn't bounce up and down. It didn't look like it had any difficulty moving. It looked like it was very natural to move that way. But at the same time, I've seen like when you look at the way a bear runs or even a human crawls, normally with a human, the shoulders are going to be more down, the back's going to be arched higher in the air, and it's going to do the, one arm in front of the other, and you're going to see those shoulder movements. This didn't have any of that. It stayed very flat and very crisp when it moved. Now, of course, I didn't stay around and watch it too long. Like I said, that fear really kicked right in me as soon as that thing dropped and I saw it moving away. That's when I turned and I left. But that's one of the details that I'm never going to forget, is just how clean it looked like it could move on force.
Yeah, man, I couldn't imagine being, like I said, 40 yards is nothing. For something that size that can move that fast, 40 yards is not a big reactionary gap for you or it. So,
correct.
You mentioned that was your only physical sighting, but you've mentioned you've had some encounters with vocalizations, and tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, for sure. So up there's always been a legend, supposedly. I call it a legend, a tall tale, a myth, whatever you want to call it, with the locals in that area. And my grandfather and my grandmother, they both have lived in that area for the last 28, 29 years. They've been up there quite a long time. And my grandfather's a very social man. He likes to go into town, have his coffee, and chat with the town folk there, especially when they were new. Now he's, of course, he is one of them now. He's a local. But they would always have these stories when I would go with them. I would hear all the local people talk about how there's the big wolf that lives in the woods. Almost all of them. It was a big wolf that lived in the woods, but nobody ever saw it. You only heard it scream and its howl. And as a kid, that terrified me because, of course, on entertainment, on television, wolves, which they are very gruesome animals, but they're made out to be killing machines, human killing machines. They'll kill any animal they see. They run in a pack. They hunt things down. So growing up, hearing about the big wolf that lives in the woods, that was always a fear in me. And I remember the first time I heard it. It was actually the following year after I had my my visual sighting. It was in October of 2011. We were out hunting. It was I went out with my father, one of his good friends, my grandfather, and the state land up there. So there's so much state public access land up there that we try to take advantage of it. So we'll spread out, and we'll drive out, and they'll drop one guy off, and you'll drive a good probably half mile, drop the next guy off, and you just keep doing that when you're out there hunting, just so we have enough room away from each other. So I was out there on the edge of a field. And this is probably a good 15 miles from the house that my grandfather lived in. We drove a little further out when we were going to go hunt. We had a specific area that we still actually, a lot of them still go to today. And I heard this howl at night again, to the point that it was one of those you could feel in your chest. And for me, of all the research I've done growing up, now later in the time, I always wonder if that was correlated to Bigfoot back then, only because supposedly from the Michigan DNR, there is no population of any type of wolf in the lower peninsula. At this point in time, 2021, and actually I think back as early as 2017, they stated there was a good population in the upper peninsula. Although obviously there's a lake in between, and we're pretty good distance away from Mackinac still, even where they live. So just kind of with that information in mind, again, looking back on all the situations I've been in, I always wondered and questioned the correlation between those two. I always, in my head, truly thought if the big wolf of the woods was truly a Bigfoot instead, that nobody was seeing but hearing. I remember being in my tree stand October 2011, and when that howl came out, it sounded like it was right on top of me, and it was very, very deep, and it wasn't like a typical coyote howl or wolf howl. I mean, this was like very deep-based, almost as if a yell from a grown man. And it's a scary thing just knowing, you know, I knew where people were. I knew how far away from the people in my group I was. We didn't really see a whole lot of other hunters up there unless it was during gun season, which is in November. So especially in October, you really don't see a whole lot of people. Even when you go drive around up there, you're pretty isolated. You're pretty much by yourself. And when I heard that and I got back with the group, and I remember asking my father, I said, "Dad, did you hear anything strange out there?" And he said, "Well, I didn't hear really anything strange. The only thing that caught my attention was I heard a howl, but I had to assume that was a wolf." And I said, "Well, what did it sound like?" And he described what it sounded like to him, and he said, "You know, it sounded pretty close, but I don't know exactly where it was, and I didn't see any tracks or I didn't see anything coming to get you." When he said it sounded close, he was a mile away from me. It sounded like it was on top of me. He said he heard it, and it sounded fairly close to him. That was the first time that I've ever heard a vocal. I guess before I continue on, do you have any questions about that one?
No, I think that's interesting.
Okay.
That I've heard of other encounters that people have had in different parts of the country that they tend to talk about the wolf or the wolf man in the woods. And I think after listening to some of the stories and some of the things people are describing, I kind of agree with you that I think it's probably more Sasquatch related than some type of a wolf or a wolf man or whatever. So some of those vocalizations are very, for lack of a better term, squatchy from what I've actually heard some of the recordings. And I think I tend to agree with you that it was probably some kind of a Sasquatch related thing versus a wolf man. But yeah, go ahead and tell us about the other audible experiences that you've had.
Yeah, for sure. You know, that one will always stand out to me. And I've heard some other strange howls over the years. I mean, to the point that, you know, they were pretty high pitched. I always could justify them as that. Yeah, that was probably a coyote. That scream, that was probably a fox or maybe even a bobcat or, you know, something like that. The most recent one, and I was very thankful that I had people with me at the time I heard this one because I had my really good friend Jesse with me up north. We were doing a little bit of filming, a little bit of hiking. He's another big guy that loves to he's a big outdoors guy. He loves to hike. He loves for that sense of adventure to just get out in the wilderness and, you know, see what we can find as far as animals or different tracks or anything like that. So I took him up to the area that I've been going to my whole life. And the first thing he said when we stepped out, we went out around midnight, and we're actively, he's a very hardcore skeptic. He does not believe in Bigfoot as far as currently living. I think he'd be okay if I share. He definitely is open to the idea of a creature like that existed at one point but does not exist today. That's his idea, which I'm the type of guy that's open to all opinions. You know, no shame to him or anybody else that feels that way. That's how I was, truthfully, until I had my encounter and the vocals that keep going on. But back to the story. So him and I were up there, and this was just this past year in November. We went up for a quick weekend, just a 2-day. The first night we went out, we, like I said, doing some hiking, doing some filming at night, trying to see if we can find any evidence of Bigfoot, you know, and just kind of to share with family and friends just to see if there was any interest there. But the first night we didn't hear anything, we didn't see anything, and he made the comment of, you know, the woods are really quiet. And I noticed that, but I wasn't going to say anything to him only because I know he's a big outdoors guy, but he's in a whole new area. I didn't want him to feel any type of suspicion or freaked out at all. It's only the two of us out there. But I noticed that the woods were extremely quiet. There weren't even bugs chirping. There was nothing. And I know in November it does get very cold up there. There was no snow yet, but even the wind wasn't even really blowing that night. I thought that was very, very strange. So we spent a couple hours out there and didn't hear anything. We went out the following night around the same time, and it was the same thing. The wind was almost nothing. There were no bugs. There were no animals moving around. There were nothing, no squirrels jumping around, nothing. And I decided to let out what's usually referred to as a whoop sound. I'm sure you've heard it on YouTube. You can definitely on the show Finding Bigfoot from Animal Planet, when they let out those howls that they do, I do my best to mimic them just to see. I just wanted to see what we could start up, even if it was a coyote. So I let out a whoop. We listened for a few minutes, nothing. I asked Jesse to do a coyote howl, and he does a pretty good one, and he did one, and we stirred up a pack of coyotes. We heard 5 different howls go off, and almost simultaneously, when the 5th one went off, we heard in the distance a much deeper howl. It was very bassy. It sounded like it was coming from something that was much bigger, whereas the coyote howl was still pretty high-pitched. This almost laid right on top of it, of a very deep howl. And I I have it on film. I show it to him every now and then. I'll send it over to text. His eyes got very wide, and he looked at me, and he said, "You heard that, right?" And I said, "Yeah, I heard that." And he said, "What was that?" And I said, "Well, you don't want me to tell you what that was." He started laughing. So we're standing out there for, probably another 15 minutes. We just stood there listening. Nothing happened. So we continue on with our walk, and we're going down this old 2-track. It's very overgrown. It used to be a 2-track that vehicles would use. So we're going down that. We're heading into another thick area. And I stop and I ask him, I'm like, not that I'm out here to prove anything. I said, but you are the skeptic. Do you want to try to hear that howl again or something similar? And he goes, okay. And I said, well, why don't we try clapping your hands? Because I've always heard, especially on TV shows and reading different interviews and things that people do when they're looking for Sasquatch, is make either tree knocks where you'll take a branch and hit a tree, or they've said that supposedly Bigfoot or Sasquatch like to communicate through clapping, which is seen in other apes around the world. So I asked him to do 2 claps, and he did. He waited probably 30 seconds. He did 2 more. And we got a response. And the response that we got, the only way I can explain it was it sounded like if you took a big branch and you struck a tree and it makes that hollow wood sound. We heard 2 of those back to back. Bam, bam. I looked at him and I said, I've never heard that before in my life other than on TV. And he said, I don't know what kind of animal out here can make a noise like that or what that was. And of course he tried to justify it. He is, like I said, he's a skeptic, which is fine. So me and him talked, and we're trying to come up with things of like maybe a branch fell off a tree. And we couldn't really come up with anything because even if a branch fell, we don't understand why it would have made 2 sounds. Unless, of course, it was an echo. However, it didn't sound like an echo. So we're looking around. I told him just listen, and I take off not too far, probably only 10, 15 yards away from him. And I find a pretty good-sized branch. So I come back to where he is on the 2-track, and we walk a little farther, a couple more feet, and I find a good-sized tree, and I do 3 wood knocks, bam, 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 all back to back. We stood there and listened. And about 3 or 4 minutes goes by, and we get a response of 2, bam, bam, again. And it sounded like it was coming from the same direction as the first one. So, after a good 5-6 minutes of convincing, I finally convinced him, well, let's walk towards the sound. We go walking towards the sound, and we get to where we don't think we're very close to it because it still sounds a distance away, but we get to where we're back towards a field. We have a pretty big open wide field. So I asked him if he wanted to do the howl. He said no. So I did my best to replicate the deep howl. And it's not easy. especially for a first timer that, I've never done this before other than last year was the first time where I tried just these different tactics that I've read so many people try and I've seen on TV and YouTube videos and things like that. It's not easy. It hurts your throat. At least it did for me. But I tried to do this very deep bass-filled howl, and we got back what sounded like a scream. It sounded like what I would have to assume a woman would sound like when she's out in the woods and she just screams. And it was just this one very high-pitched yell. And at that point, I didn't know what it was, of course. I had my assumptions that I'm like, yeah, there's a Bigfoot out here, and I'm lucky enough that it's communicating with me. I also had my friend who at this point I could tell was pretty shaken up by the whole experience. He asked me, took him a couple times, 3-4 times of, hey, can we get out of here? Finally, I said, yeah. So we decided to leave for that night. We went out the next morning to that same area. We looked around, couldn't find anything. I went to where I thought the tree knock would have come from, at least in the general direction. Like I said, I've been going up in that area my whole life, so I was pretty familiar with the woods and the different roads and 2 tracks of where they go. So I thought I had a pretty good idea. Ultimately, we didn't find anything the next morning, and we packed it up and headed home. But that experience, just that one weekend, that was very eye-opening, and it definitely makes me wonder what's out there. And I really hope I have another visual sighting sometime soon.
Yeah, that sounds crazy, man. I don't think anybody can do that guttural howl growl like Bobo from Finding Bigfoot. I think he's blown his throat out a couple of times doing those himself. So, and that guy's a pro. So, it's not for the amateurs, right?
Right. Yeah.
So, I guess this question comes up a lot. I like asking this question. I think it's certainly subjective, but you've been interested in this for a while. You've had some experiences. You've actually had a visual sighting. What do you think these things are? Yeah,
it's funny. A lot of my friends ask me that because they know how big I am to friends and family alike. My wife's not the happiest as far as, I want to spend my free time out in the woods looking for an ape, basically. But that's pretty much what I think it is. I truly think that it's some sort of an ape, I guess. I mean, I guess in my mind it could be an ancestor to us somehow. It could be along the human chain. But I really think it's more of it would lean more towards an undiscovered ape of some sort. Not so much, I guess, Gigantopithecus, but certainly branched off of that, I believe. I don't really know. I try to explain this all the time, but I really think it leans more towards an ape species than physically just human. And I know human and ape we're very similar, we're very close, but I do think it's more of a intelligent ape that I guess broke off from that system somehow, or that link that they all had.
Yeah, man, it's one of those questions I've asked myself over and over and over again, and I clearly don't know. I don't know any more than the next person. So, you hear so many stories and so many different sightings of, interactions that people have. And sometimes they seem very ape-like. Sometimes they seem more human. They even, in some cases, seem to be showing empathy to the people that are interacting with them. So I definitely think that I've come to the conclusion that I think they're probably some sort of like relic hominin. I don't know if they're the missing link necessarily, but I tend to think they're more of some sort of relic ape-like ancestor. That's the best thing I can come up with. Who knows? Maybe one day we'll know. Let me ask you this. I don't know if this is something you've considered or not, but I've wrestled with this recently myself. I've even got in some of the Bigfoot groups on Facebook, and one of the questions that one of the admins asked in one of the groups was, are you pro-kill or are you against killing one of these things? And that's something that I've went back and forth on many times, but Is that something you've considered, or do you have an opinion on that, whether one of these things should be shot and dragged in and say, okay, here you go, study away, or do you think there's another way to prove the existence and without killing one?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and it's funny. I heard that on a Cliff Barrickman's podcast. I know he dives into that quite a bit, but if it was up to me, I would rather see one somehow trapped. I think that's nearly impossible. But I would like that to be the situation to prove their existence. I don't think science is ever going to recognize its existence or even its possibility without some sort of a body. I mean, people have brought in hair samples that supposedly have come back to unidentified ape. They've come back to a relic hominid or have human DNA within it that's different than a regular human DNA. But I still don't believe they're going to ever recognize truthfully its existence until there's a body brought in. And personally, I don't want to ever shoot one. I would never shoot one, truthfully, unless I felt like my life was in danger. Like if I was out there in the woods and I was being attacked, then of course I'm gonna unload if I have to. But I would never go out and find one if I saw one, like I had another visual sighting. I would never just take its life. Truthfully, for me, after we experienced our noises, even though I had my visual sighting, it was really those sounds of there's something intelligent here that you're dealing with when you encounter one. And it took me a long time to finally realize that. It was last year that I finally had this come to meeting, basically, of there's something more than just a 6 to 8 foot tall ape that runs around the woods. There's something there. There's some kind of intelligence that we don't even understand that an animal possesses, and I think it would be very hard for me to take the life of one just for how human-like they are. I mean, they, like you said, they could be a relic hominid. They definitely very well could be. And I think for me, that would almost be like seeing a human in the woods and just taking its life. That's not the kind of person I am. It'd be very, very hard for me to take the life of one. Even though you're going to have a big reward, you're going to have a big payday, your name's going to be in every paper and every science study they ever write about for the rest of the time. But I don't know if I could live with that. Even with all the fame and glory, you have to realize you very well could have been the reason now that either they'll never be found again, hypothetically. There's always that thing of like, do I kill one and potentially ruin everything for, that existence, and for some oddball reason you kill that one and people start killing them and they go extinct? Or do I just have the great feeling of I had an experience with something that a lot of people will never experience, and I know what's out there, even though people like to say it's not. And now I can live with the fact of, I feel confident that there's something else in the woods. For me, that's my answer. I would much rather have a million experiences than ever have to take one's life.
Yeah, I'm kind of right there with you, man. Like I said, I've went back and forth, and I guess the frustrating part for me is I feel very much the same way you do. I don't think anybody is ever science is never going to recognize that this thing exists until there is a body, dead or alive. Outside of that, it's just not going to happen. But I'm very much like you. I've heard stories, many stories about hunters who've had these things in their sights, and they just said, I couldn't take the shot. It was just too human. And for a hunter that says that and a lot of them didn't have great experiences with them. There were some pretty, emotionally charged, not great encounters. And for these guys to say, after all that, I just couldn't take the shot, there's got to be something to that. And most of them say it's because of the intelligence and the human quality that they had while they're looking in the face, and they just couldn't do it. So I'm kind of there with you, man. I definitely, there could be a lot of fallout. Like you said, there'd be a lot of fame and fortune, to the person who takes one of these things down. But I don't know that I could personally live with that. So, you mentioned when we were talking before we went on the air that you were involved in and doing some sort of a web series about urban legends. Why don't you tell us a little bit about what you got going on there?
Oh yeah, for sure. So the idea really, this has been a brainchild of mine for a long time. Even before I was interested in the idea of Bigfoot, I was always interested in film. I always loved to try to create something. I remember I used to use my parents' video camera even as a little kid and just act out whatever my imagination was doing. And I'm talking like 6-7 years old. I've got home videos of me just, acting like I was in a movie or something like that. And it's funny looking back in life. I don't think I ever want to be a movie star or TV star or anything, but I've always had that creative mind, I guess. I'm always looking for something else. And it really got big over the last 2 years. Like I said, I connected with my good friend Jesse. Me and him, due to work issues and things like that, we kind of parted ways for a while. We always stayed in contact, but he went his separate way with a career choice, and I went mine. And we got back connected back together again. And he told me about, he's been studying Bigfoot and studying the paranormal and things like that. He's always had an interest in the paranormal, and I've always had an interest in Bigfoot. And I told him about this idea that I've had since I was really 16, is I wanted to make a documentary on Bigfoot in Michigan, just basically the legend and can we find any proof. And took me almost 10 years to finally start that project, but it started with what was supposed to be a one-off documentary, and I got a lot of footage for that, and that was actually one of the reasons we went up north to film that weekend, was just getting some footage to use for that documentary. And then about probably only a month ago, he came to me and he said, we're doing a lot of work for this documentary. Have you had the idea of just opening that up to like the paranormal stuff? Could we go on to ghost adventures and things like that, like ghost hunts and investigations? And that was never really my thing. Not that I necessarily don't believe in that, or I definitely respect the people that like to do it. I just never had as big of an interest in that as I did the Bigfoot. So we kind of compromised a little bit. He told me he was willing to basically help me with what I need as far as voiceover and things like that for my documentary. And I came to him a couple days later and I said, let's just start this web series. At the time, which we still are, him and our other buddy Jeremy, we run a little podcast of our own. Nothing big, literally just something to do in our free time. And we just talk about all these different urban legends and mysteries and Bigfoot and UFOs and things like that get brought up all the time. So I told him, I'm like, let's just scratch this documentary. We'll keep all the footage that we have, of course, and we'll use it towards creating this little web series. And then that way, I'm not so centralized on one idea. Although Bigfoot is my main focus, it's my main interest, I really felt that a web series overall, different kinds of urban legends, really kind of opens that avenue for a lot of different branches that you can, or ways you can branch off into a lot of different things. So yeah, we're still filming. We've actually got a trip planned to go back to that area at the end of this month, and then we'll be investigating a couple spots on the west side of Michigan in March, and another trip in April. We're hoping to have the web series, at least the first episode, released either at the end of April or the beginning of May. It's kind of a working title right now. However, it will divulge into a multi-series episode of different urban legends, just us investigating different things. Like I said, the Bigfoot one is going to be very fun to release. I've already got hours of footage that I'm going to have to cram down into, roughly a 45-minute episode. But it's been fun. It's been a good journey so far, and I'm pretty excited to see what the future holds.
Well, that's awesome, man. Once you get it finished, I'd love to see it. And once you guys get it up on YouTube or whatever, and I assume you're going to have it up on YouTube. Is that the plan?
Yeah, that's the plan. We talked a lot about that as far as do we branch out to do we try to get it on like Amazon Prime? Do we go to a different streaming service? And truthfully, for me, I'm not to sound humble or anything, I'm not looking to make money off any of this. This is just something I'm interested in. This is something I like to do in my free time. And right now it's a project that we do when we have time to do it. That's why we're waiting till probably May to get it released, only because with work schedules and family life, that's kind of the only time we can set aside time to work on it. It's going to take us a couple more months, but yes, it's all going to be released on YouTube. We don't know how often we'll actually release episodes. Of course, the plan really, we would like to release one about monthly. We're hoping that's the overall goal, but it is going to be released through YouTube. We're currently on there as Table Talk Entertainment, and you can find us on social media, Table Talk JJ on Instagram and Twitter. We're on Facebook as well. To be honest, we don't use it all that much. That might change once the episodes are being released. But yeah, if you go to Table Talk Entertainment, we've got what we have so far. And we're working on that project. It's going to be fun, but it is all about just different urban legends throughout our state of Michigan. Jesse brought up that there were so many, and I didn't even realize how many there really were. Like I said, I'm very focused on the Sasquatch front. But there's a lot of stuff that we look to check off the list once we get moving.
That sounds awesome, man. And maybe once you guys start throwing those up there, and if you come across some cool Bigfoot stuff and any other paranormal stuff, maybe we'll have you back on for another episode. We'd love to hear it. And I know I really appreciate your time, man. I know it's valuable. I know you and your wife just welcomed a new addition to the family. Congratulations, man. I know that's got to be amazing for you guys, and I know time is precious, so I really appreciate the time you gave me tonight.
Oh, well, thank you for that. Yeah, it's something. It's definitely it's life-changing for the better, of course. It's been fun so far. It hasn't been that long, but it's been fun. So that whole journey with extending family, it's going to be a good time. And yeah, I appreciate you taking the time to have me on. I know we connected through one of those Facebook groups like you were talking about, and really I got into those when I started working on this project, just to try to reach out to see what people were experiencing and go from there. But I really appreciate you taking the time to have me on. It's been great talking to you.
Absolutely, man. The pleasure was all mine. And that's going to be it for tonight, folks. If you've had an encounter and you want to be on the show to talk about it, shoot me an email at brian@sasquatchodyssey.net. Thanks again, Jake, man. I really appreciate fascinating stuff, and best of luck with the web series, man. It was great to have you on. I appreciate it.
Oh, thank you. Thanks again. And, yeah, I hope to talk to you soon. We'll talk again. And, yeah, once that YouTube series comes out, I'll be sure to send you a link so you can check it out. Hopefully, it's going to be some good stuff. That's what we're hoping for.
Awesome, man. Well, have a great night, and you folks have a great night, too. We'll see you next week.